Hello, I'm Julia, and this video is all about my string quartet number 19. This one is a theme and variations. I've played around a lot in my previous pieces with repetition and with variations built on the same material, which is, after all, what an awful lot of music is all about. And really, this is that in its most formal sense. This is absolutely a theme and 6 variations, and then a brief coda. It's quite a long, drawn-out theme, which begins at A after a brief introduction, and every variation repeats the whole thing, although there are various tempo changes. It starts off very quietly, very legato, although we have a little bit of syncopation in the melody and we have quite a lot of suspensions in the accompanying chords, which follows on from the ideas in my quartet number 18. But we very definitely start in this peaceful, quite settled G major. Within the theme, we take a few slightly unexpected turns. At bar 21, we find ourselves in D minor. And then from there, we move into A minor at bar 25. We just about come back into G major in bar 29, but then instantly leave it again. And 4 bars later, we're back in A minor. And then through this descending sequence, we end up landing on this C major chord, which turns into a dominant 7th. And takes us for the first variation into F major, which is a tone lower than where we started. And this is the pattern that we follow throughout. Conventionally, in a theme and variations, the variations tend to be in the same key as the theme on which they're based, or you often get a minor version if the theme was in the major, or vice versa. But they tend to be based in the same tonality. But I wanted to do something slightly different here. Going back to this idea of playing with our expectations, I think it becomes fairly clear once we get to B that what we're going to get is a variation on what we've just heard. It's faster, it's louder, and the parts swap around a bit, all of which I think are fairly obvious when you listen to it. But what might be less obvious, at least if you're not looking at the score, is the change in tonality. It's only gone down by a tone, which is far enough for us to know that something is different. It certainly feels different, but it's not so far that we feel miles away from home. And I've carried on with this idea as we go through all of the variations. There are 6 of them in total, and each time we move down a tone. So after the first variation in F major, we move down a tone to E flat major for the second variation, then down again to D flat major for the third, to B major, or you could think of it as C flat major for the 4th, A major for the 5th, and then for the 6th we're back into G, although we'll come back to that when we get to it. So all the way through we have these subtle changes in tonality which actually take us through the whole octave down a whole tone scale. And it feels like a fairly natural progression because we're not moving very far each time. But I think it gives each variation its own character, beyond the changes in tempo and rhythm, and so on. The variations themselves explore various different styles, and the parts swap around so that everyone gets the melody at some point. After the very stately theme, we have a more lively version of effectively the same thing for our first variation. And then the second variation is this very cheeky pizzicato. The third variation is very slow and sustained, and the melody is very pared down. I wanted this to be a moment of calm after 2 fast variations. This really is a place to breathe. And there's certainly a bit of Schubert behind this. The long sustained notes with these short interjections from the first violin are definitely inspired by the slow movement of Schubert's string quintet. I think I was trying to capture just a little bit of the beauty of that. And it's probably in this variation that we really reach the climax of the piece, at least so far, when all of the parts come together with this big fortissimo figure. After all of that quite serious, soulful stuff, we need a bit of movement, so the next variation is a waltz. And I think it breaks the tension and it feels very joyful and light. It feels like we can finally move. And it's also in a very bright B major. The fifth variation is a proper allegro. We now have lots of movement, lots of fast quaver passages, lots of momentum. And when we get to the end, it sounds as though we're finally going back into G major. We've come full circle. Except that we don't. It wouldn't really be a set of variations without a minor version. So rather than going back to G major, which is what we're expecting, we go into the minor instead. We're back to the original mood of the opening, the theme, but it's darker this time because we're in the minor. However, we get this sudden burst of light when we head back to the major, initially to D major. Although we then get waylaid a bit, we get dragged back into the minor, and we're not quite done yet. There's still a bit of playing with expectations going on, and we work our way up to a final fortissimo in B minor. Before eventually we find our way back to a D major chord, which becomes our dominant seventh and takes us finally back home into G major. We have now come full circle. And we end just as we began, very quietly and very smoothly. But this time it's different, because we know where we've been.